Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Sarah Williams?
This is she. Hi.
Hello, Sarah. This is Paul Holdengräber calling you from the Quarantine Tapes. I'm so pleased that you could take our call.
Yes, of course. I'm so happy to be here.
It's a wherever here may be.
Yeah, exactly. Here in my bedroom, talking to you on the phone.
Exactly. Well, what is quite extraordinary about these quarantine moments is that the phone, which until very recently and for quite some time was exotic, has become something we use all the time.
It's true.
Because we need, and we'll be speaking about the notion of community, but we need that connection. Now that we can't touch each other, we need to be in contact in one form or another.
Yeah. And I think it's even changing how we, in these times, changing how we use it. Or at least, I guess, for me, for my generation, it feels like we're used to
Tell me about your generation.
Well, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone, but I just think, for me, I guess, using it more text-based and social media and apps like that, like I actually don't talk on the phone all that much, but I am in our quarantine times, am talking on the phone a lot more, which has been really a nice way a nice thing to reconnect to and a nice way to connect to people.
Has it brought you closer to some people you were not close to before?
Definitely, or close in a different way. I think it's a different kind of conversation. I think we're all like living through something that's very challenging and unprecedented, and that we're having a different kind of conversation about, I think, meaning and how we're making meaning in our lives. And I think I'm definitely talking on the phone to people in a way that I wouldn't usually talk on the phone to them. And even thinking about my staff, who I have a really great staff, and we talk a lot, and we're usually in space together a lot. But even the sort of conversations and how that has changed has been really interesting, I guess. Yeah, has been really depthful.
So, Sarah, for our listeners who may not know you yet, could you introduce yourself and tell us both about you, and also you are mentioning your staff, and I imagine it's the staff of the Women's Center for Creative Work, and so
that's true.
I'd love you to say a few words about both Sarah and also the center you run.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, my name's Sarah Williams. I'm one of the co-founders and now the executive director of Women's Center for Creative Work, which is a intersectional feminist arts organization here in Los Angeles, where I'm speaking from. We do a lot of programming and artist in residence projects. We have a publishing press. We have a shared workspace that's open Monday through Friday. And just essentially doing many things to platform and present the work of women and non-binary artists. I am from Los Angeles. I grew up in Hawthorne, California, which is in the South Bay here, so have lived here most of my life. I'm speaking from my apartment in Los Feliz, where I live with my wife and my two dogs, and we've been here for about 28, 30 days now.
How is it going? How is that part going?
It's going okay.
I hear about a lot of people who are getting to know each other, perhaps even too well, in these moments.
I know, and I would say I do think we're people who before this spent a lot of time together. Like I think as couples go, we spent a lot of time together, but 24 hours a day with somebody for multiple weeks, or I mean, I think we're looking at months potentially, it's a strange thing, and in super interesting ways and challenging ways. I think even the normalcy of sort of like the separation of going to work and coming home like changes conversations. I think you're coming up with different ways of talking to each other and different ways of relating. And, I think, it's both great and can be really like, it can be challenging. We live in, a 1-bedroom apartment, so it's very,
right. No, of course. And I'm curious. It's something I've brought up on these quarantine tapes with a few of my guests. I'm curious what will happen in 9 months, and I'm curious what will happen to marriages. How people will interact with each other, how this social distancing, which can't happen at home unless someone is ill, what effect it will have, and what effect it will have also when we no longer need to be distant in this way. How will we go back to what appears to be, or what we call perhaps a bit too easily normal life?
Yeah, I think it's my sense that might really shift, or at least in the near future, even once we can go back outside in different ways. That I think I do think this might fundamentally shift how we think about normal and how we interact with each other. And even if some of it in the beginning is a certain kind of fear-based, or like I think it'll be hard to assume that it'll be totally fine even once we go back out. But like, how these new systems we've created, different ways we've learned to communicate and be in community. I think, I'm interested. I do think there'll be some sort of fundamental shift.
And I wonder how it will perhaps shift the Women's Center for Creative Work. Do you have a sense? I mean, I imagine it's something. I hear you breathing there.
Yeah, sigh. Did you hear that sigh?
No. I was going to call it a sigh, but then I didn't want to give it that. Now that you have, yes, I heard your sigh, Sarah. And why so? Try to unpack that sigh.
Yeah, so the space before this, I think that's important to kind of maybe preface with, is that
paint a picture.
Yeah, so it's this really dynamic community space, and that
what happened in that dynamic community space?
So it's open pretty much every day. I mean, Monday through Friday we have regular hours, but then evenings there's events, weekends there's programming. Like there's really something going on probably 60 hours a week at WCCW is our shorthand for it. And it's really, we've been in our location now for about 5 years. Actually, sometime next week it'll be exactly the 5-year anniversary. And
happy birthday!
Thank you. Yeah, and we really started it from scratch. And we had a small grant that let us pay rent on the space for the first month, and then really called on the community of artists and creatives that we had been in conversation with about this to if this is something we want to have happen, that there really needed to be a lot of collectivity around supporting it and pushing it forward. And so that is what's been happening for the past 5 years. And we have over 550 members, and, over thousands of people use it every year, either using the workspace or coming to programs or seeing the exhibition or publishing a book or buying a book that we've published. And it's really, I think, in I guess late capitalism, we have very few of these types of spaces that are not work or home or somewhere where it's it necessitates buying something to participate. And it really is this sort of other space where people can just come and hang out and have really interesting conversations and make friends and meet collaborators and learn about different practices and ways of thinking. And I think it's become this really special place to a lot of people, but that has been really rooted in being together in physical space. And not always. We have a very active social media experience, and obviously the publishing project, books can ship off to anywhere in the world, but a lot of it, I'd say the real heart of it is that it's this space, this very active space here in LA. And we've been having conversations. I mean, it's only been a month that we've had to be closed, and we've come up with a few digital projects that we're working on that the intention is continuing to connect people and be able to share sort of work and ideas. And keep people engaged with each other in that way. But I do it's going to require, I think, a really much more drastic, perhaps, rethinking of what's important about it and how can we continue to foster some of those things. And
maybe what was important before may be different now. There may be a real shift, what one might call a paradigm shift, a real shift in even what a community means. And
totally,
because your center, as I understand it, and I haven't yet had the pleasure of a men welcome.
Yes, everyone is welcome. We have a series of core values, but yeah, as long as everyone's reliant, acknowledging them, that everyone is welcome.
And I was going to I'll come to the core values in a moment, but what does community mean for you? And perhaps differently put, what did it mean, and what might it become, or how might its meaning shift or change? As you think about it now?
I think that's a hard one to answer. I think
that's my specialty.
Yeah. I mean, I think before there was this very kind of practical ability to define the community by who was doing things, who was interacting, we really endeavor to be incredibly welcoming, that even if it's your first time checking something out, that we really do want you to feel that you're here and you can be part of this community if that's what you're interested in. And so I think that is going to become much harder to sense. Yeah. Or maybe as we're kind of thinking about both physical and digital space, or maybe there becomes a time when it's more nomadic and there's less of a rooted home for the organization.
One of the ways I might help you along, as it were, is on your website. You list as the core values. I mean, among many, you list one that caught my eye, where you say no art is neutral.
Yeah,
it is either transforming or upholding the status quo. Art is a form of dissent. I'm curious for you to say more about that, and how perhaps those core values may be operational in the future when you do reopen to warm bodies, not just virtually.
Totally. I mean, I think to speak to that point a little bit, I think we are interested in working with artists and art making practices that are doing that work of transforming the status quo. And I think obviously we're taking a particularly an intersectional feminist lens, but in that I think there's also a lot of anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, decolonial values to that. So we are primarily, I think, in the artists we work with and the programs that are happening at the space, we're definitely forefronting people who are working in those sort of ways and challenging our sort of normative ways of thinking and being. And in some ways, in hopeful ways, I think so is what's happening now. What's happening now is doing that to all of us. And I think artists are having a really, and some artists, I shouldn't speak for all, but a lot of artists I know are having a really challenging time right now. I think it feels hard to understand one's role and the role of making and the importance of art when such obviously structural things are falling apart and structural issues are at play. And I don't know, but I guess I have hope. I believe, in art's power and ability to sort of process, to digest some of the societal things that are happening, and to be able to represent them and recontextualize them in ways that can be really impactful for people. And I think another strange thing that's or not strange, it's not strange to me, but another, I think, notable thing that is happening now is that in these times that are so uncertain, and we're very in very difficult emotional places, I think that we are turning to art. That art is what is helping a lot of us along and holding a lot of us together in these times. And I guess I really do believe.
How do you think people are turning to art in a way that may be hopeful? And how do both generally speaking in the way you perceive it or see it or know about it, but also perhaps importantly how that experience is working itself through you, and what is the kind of art you're turning to for, I don't know if it's for solace, or perhaps, to come back to my question, to enlarge the notion of dissent.
I mean, I guess there's sort of two ways to answer that. I think in a larger way that people are turning to creative practice, creative production, whether that's music or films or books, art in different ways, like for solace, for comfort, for entertainment, I guess, even distraction. But I think in art being a form of dissent, I think within our community, what I am seeing and seeing in a way that, like, conversations with people, seeing on social media, seeing in ways people are organizing right now is artists looking to highlight how this is I guess how the sort of structures of society that have been really oppressive to many people, most of us, I would say, in a lot of ways, that how those are sort of like serving us even less in these times, how they're starting to crumble.
Your organization is called Women's Center for Creative Work. I'm curious how you would define. I know you have a very broad and large and perhaps capacious notion of creative work. So,
yeah.
So how would you define that? Because it's a term, obviously, that has so many different variants, and I think for you it has a very definite sense what the word creative work means, and you delineate, and how you delineate the edges perhaps of creativity itself.
Yeah, and we'd like to take I think we especially do like to take a really expansive approach to that definition. And I don't even know if, like, I think I like the boundaries of that being pushed consistently. So I don't know if it even feels necessary for us to have like a clean boundary of it. But that, like, I think it's, of course, any art making practice, but expanding that to sort of any sort of creative practice that people pursue. And we do serve both kind of artists and professional artists and creatives, people who work in music or film or, any sort of creative field, but then also really want to be a space where people can have access to a creative practice, however broadly that might be defined, and sort of the value that comes from that, no matter what it is you do, sort of professionally or otherwise, that there is this, that I think our sense is that there's inherent value in developing that creativity and that creative practice for yourself. And that, I mean, for me, it's a lot about, the value of that is a lot about kind of a sense of the potential that we have to make things. And, like, I mean, yes, we'll literally make a thing, but that, like, literally the whole world is just made up of a bunch of things that people are making either together or separately. And that I do think, especially for groups of people who have been oppressed in some way, and especially women, but being intersectional feminist organization, like, we also are talking about race and class and sexuality and all of that those are often people who have not had as much privilege or permission to sort of make the world in the way that they wanted. And that's really important to, like, have a place and a space and to have that fostered. Yeah, to really, like, have that permission granted, and to envision ways in which we can make the world together.
I was interested to notice that the WCCW gives out emergency healthcare grants.
Oh, yes, I'm in the middle of that.
I imagine. I was about to ask you both the genealogy of it. How did that come about? And what does it look like now, when I imagine such grants are in dire need? Yeah,
so we've been doing the emergency health grant for 5 years now, and there's an anonymous donor who from the first year has been funding the grant, and they came up with some of the shape of it. They knew they wanted to do health grants for emergency health grants for artists in Southern California. And so we were put in touch and ended up kind of shaping a program around that initial impulse. And so for the past 5 years, we've been doing them incrementally, usually once a year. And just to kind of give a sense of scale right now, I'd say we usually get between about 100 and 150 applications a year, and we're able to give out usually about 30 to 40 grants between $2,000 and $3,000, which is very, very impactful to the folks who receive it. But there's obviously still in normal times a really disparate need between what we're able to do and what the need is. But this year we were right about to launch it in early March when kind of the COVID-19 crisis was coming to light, and sort of how it was a little more clear what it was going to look like as it came to the U.S. and to LA specifically. And so we paused for a moment to kind of see if we could reshape it to be responsive, and needing to look and understand for a moment what was going to be needed. But we were able to do that, and we ended up we found a couple of matches through other funders in LA for the anonymous, the amount the anonymous donor was putting towards the project. And so we're able to almost triple the amount of grants we are able to give out. And we made them about $1,000 each, and made our cycle for processing it much quicker, so that we were able to be much more responsive to people who needed it urgently. Because really, I mean, so many of the creative people working in creative fields are freelancers, right, have very deep job insecurity. And so they were often kind of very early on, they would have their jobs cut and are in deep need of funding.
Which brings me to the question, aside from monetary help and support, what do you think artists need most urgently in this moment?
I mean, I think it becomes so it's become so hard to get back past financial, because I think people are in such I think it's already generally a class of people that's operating with a lot of scarcity sometimes. And so that people are really concerned about keeping their housing, especially in cities like LA, where it's already very expensive, and going to buy groceries. And, it's depending on, just now with this expanded unemployment, some of them will be eligible, but normally they're not even eligible for that sort of thing when something like this might happen. So, I mean, I think they just really, it's that is one of the biggest things that is needed.
The rest may be more of a luxury in some way. Did Trump's election in 2016 change your outlook as an organization?
Very much so. I think, before that, I think being in LA and, working in sort of a rural field, there was a certain kind of understanding of feminism and what we meant when we were talking about that, and what felt important at the time in advancing those sort of issues. But I think with Trump's election, it became really, clear. It was very clarifying that what we were up against in a way, and that a lot of the assumptions I think we had been making about what is important and what is baseline understanding of sort of these things was challenged deeply. And so we actually rewrote all the core values that are up on our website now. We rewrote those sort of in the wake of the 2016 election to really kind of forefront, I think, more radical political work we were interested in doing, and just also making sure to not kind of make assumptions about what we stood for and what we wanted to be doing and who we wanted to be serving and how, and just to really articulate that, I think, as a counter to this, what was seen as a really hate-filled kind of entity that now is holding so much power in the country. And I think for artists as well, and I think it's happening now too, in this, that I think there's a lot of deep questioning for artists of whether what they were doing is important. Is this what they should be doing after Trump's election? That should they, I guess, I mean, I hate to use this phrase, but yeah, doing something more important. Should they get a law degree and be, doing immigrant rights work? And yes, obviously, people should be doing that if that's what they feel called to do. But that, how do we? But that also art making continues to be important. So yeah, I think it really shook, I think, from both an organizational perspective and also a community perspective. That election really kind of shook things up.
Sarah, in closing, I'd like to quote to you a line of Arundhati Roy, where she says, "We know, of course, there's really no such thing as the voiceless. They're only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard."
Yes. Yeah.
I'm wondering how this may resonate with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a powerful quote. I mean, it makes me think. I'm just going to go with what it initially makes me think. It makes me think how this continues. I do believe that, like, more overarchingly, but I think a kind of specific, like, example that we're seeing in our times we have to continue to think about and be cognizant of is, so our programming director, Mandy Harris Williams, has like an art practice and like kind of intellectual practice that she largely is producing and promoting through events often when we can do that, but then like through Instagram and through social media, and her Instagram handle is Ideal Black Female. And in this crisis, she and some others, folks who she works with ongoingly, have been talking a lot about how like the algorithms and how especially like Black women and Black voices are getting silenced in these sort of algorithms that I think in some ways, I mean, I wouldn't say we see them as neutral, but I don't know if we're like, many people are having like really critical engagement with how the algorithm is working on Instagram. But and with leading this like project in the early days, kind of when we've been in quarantine here in LA, about how the sort of silencing of these voices in this time is like particularly violent, when this is the kind of mediums we're relying on to communicate with each other and to share ideas.
Sarah, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you, and I hope someday I'll be able to come to the Women's Center for Creative Work and see all the good work you're doing. And
I would love that.
Well, thank you very much. I will make an absolute effort to come. And in the meantime, I hope you and your wife and your dog get along as well as possible.
Yes, thank you.
And I look forward to when we meet in person. Take good care of yourself, and I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for being part of the Quarantine Tapes on dublab.
You too. Thank you so much.
All the best to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
To support this show and dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.